continuation of discussion of the streets committee, brush pile, and then the community center due diligence. So with that, we'll dive right on in. So with us tonight virtually is Michaela Huat with Baker Tilly. She's here to talk about, they've got some updated estimated bond runs, and just kind of talk about what would bonding for the city hall project look like. Michaela, do you want me to pull up the documents on my end, or did you want to share your screen? If you have them.
Yeah, the question is, which one do you want to, or where do you want to start? If you want to start into the description of the project and the bond structure or the calendar, and I can certainly pull them up if wherever you want to start. I know we have a lot of documents to kind of look at.
How the council, do you want to start off start the overview of the process first and then talk numbers, or go the other way around? Any care? Okay, let's talk about, well then let's start with the council then. Michaela, so is that this document right here, I think? Schedule events?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, I'll pull that up for you. Come on, let's go. Oh, not that one. Let's go. There we go. Okay.
All right. So the projects that we have for consideration and conversation tonight include the financing for the city hall and acquisition of the fire truck. And so pursuant to those two projects, and we can kind of get into the numbers and the structure a little bit later, but the process or the authority that we're looking at for financing of both of these projects, starting with the city hall financing, we'd be looking at capital improvement bonds, which would require a capital improvement plan as part of the process for leading to issuance of the debt. The other financing mechanism that we're looking at would be equipment certificates for the fire truck acquisition. So again, we'd be looking at two different authorities to finance each of these projects. However, it could be one bond issue for financing of both, with multiple purposes and statutory authorities that are allowing the city to issue debt for each of these projects. So the calendar that's before you here is more of a traditional financing process. And one of the things I'll say is, when we're working to put together this calendar, there are several steps that are required based on what the financing authority is. So for example, the capital improvement bonding requires this public hearing for the capital improvement plan. There is a 30-day reverse referendum period. And then that's part of the process towards the issuance of the bonds itself. And so when we're looking at the calendars, we look at the steps that are required to occur prior to bond issuance, leading up to authorizing sale of the bonds, and then lastly, selling of the bonds and receipt of the bond proceeds. So when we're looking at timing for needing the funds, we typically start at the end and say, okay, when do you need to have the proceeds? And then work backwards for when we would have to start all of the different steps in the process. So the calendar that's before you tonight is one option for, again, the city council approval for issuance of the bonds, and working backwards, looking at receiving the proceeds at the end of October, which then would require sale of the bonds on October 7th, authorizing sale of the bonds on September 3rd, and then, like I said, the steps related to the capital improvement plan that would occur starting in July. Also included with the steps to issue bonds would be a rating conference with S&P, who the city has worked with in the past. That would occur between the set sale of the bonds September 3rd and then the sale of the bonds on October 7th. and it is about a 90-day process, considering the steps for starting the public hearing, the set sale, and the receipt of the proceeds. So as I said, when we're looking at when the city plans to start construction on the project and needs to have the bond proceeds to start making the payments, in this scenario, we would be looking at the end of October for when the city would have the funds to both reimburse for the fire truck acquisition as well as starting the city hall improvements. In this case, I think in conversations with David, that if the project is expected to start sooner and the funds are needed sooner than the October 31st that this calendar includes, one option would be to follow this calendar, and that would include perhaps a reimbursement resolution to finance those costs that were incurred before the bonds were issued. That's one option, or alternatively, we can look at a more rapid timing for issuance of the bonds that would include what's considered a parameters resolution, which follows the same steps in the process towards bond issuance, but instead of having the sale of the bonds be a council award, there would be a parameters resolution that council would adopt and authorize the sale, and essentially there would be a pricing committee designated that would sell the bonds at a sooner date, September 10th, and then that would allow the proceeds to be received October 3rd, so roughly a month sooner. It is a little different process. The outcome is the same, but it allows the proceeds to be, like I said, the biggest difference is you have a pricing committee for authorizing sale of the bonds versus city council, and then the proceeds would be awarded or would be received at an earlier date.
Michaela,
So maybe yep.
do you want to quickly talk about, because obviously we've been talking about CIPs, so the CIP piece, you want to just tell them about how that works and how that's not, we don't have a full capital improvement plan conducted, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. You want to touch on that?
Yeah, good point. So when we look at different ways to finance projects, they all have different statutory requirements. And when you're issuing capital improvement bonds, the city needs to have a 5-year plan and hold a public hearing on that 5-year plan, CIP plan. However, it is not necessarily, it's more of a document that you have to issue the bonds. And there's a template that we typically work through, and bond counsel can provide it, where we include it includes the requirements for issuing the debt. It's not a comprehensive capital improvement plan. It's more of what your 5-year plan is and what you're planning to issue the debt for. So it's a fairly boilerplate template that you work from, and you include within there what your 5-year financing plan would be, including this project, and that's what you're holding the public hearing on, is that plan.
The other thing I just wanted to point out, Michaela and I did talk about, as she referenced there at the end, the other option, more expedited option on the parameters resolution. I think from my perspective is either way you do it, you might, we're looking at, should City Hall move forward, we get that bid, the bid's acceptable to the council, you accept that bid. High-Tech's intention is to get going by late August, maybe the first week of September at the latest, to be able to get the projects rolling. If they can't get going sooner than that, they're not going to be comfortable being able to get concrete poured and cured, and so they can then be putting up framing and doing that before you get into mid to late October, again, weather dependent. So either way we go, we'll probably have to issue a reimbursement resolution. It's the same essentially resolution we did for the fire truck, just saying, hey, we're incurring some costs now, we intend to bond later. So we meet those statutory requirements. Personally, I think we'll be fine in that first 2 months when it comes to expenses. That's not when the big expenses come in anyway. We can work with High-Tech on that as well. And then my reasoning for that is, again, I think the general process we have here, again, I think it's a little more public. It's on October, what do we say, Michaela, 7th?
October 7th, yep.
Yeah, October 7th, how that works is Baker Tilly sells the bonds. And then at that meeting, so that's our meeting night, so they'd sell the bonds during the day when the market's open. And then they would come that night and say, this is the result of the sale. So this isn't a kind of a 2-week thing. It's the market's open, they put out the bonds get bid on, they come and they say this is the lowest bidder per se on the bonds. They bring it before you that night to accept the bid. Or essentially what they're bidding on is their rate, right?
Yeah.
So they bring that to you on that night, and then you get to it in a public meeting, say, we accept that bid. Versus the other way around was you saying, okay, we accept a bid in this range, we set a committee together, when they come in, the committee meets and says, yep, that meets the council's parameters, blessed. You up front say what your range is you're willing to consider, but then when the actual bid comes in, it's not done necessarily in a public meeting. So I think this way, again, makes the whole process a little more public. You as a council get to act as a body to accept the final bid award versus just saying, well, if here's the parameters, then you can accept it. But ultimately it's up to what you're comfortable with. So that's kind of the process. Mikhail, is there anything else you wanted to add before we count?
Yeah, I would just add, I think, David, when we talked earlier too, I mean, subject to what the monthly cash flow is going to be for the project and when you would need the funds. I think when we were looking at your capital fund that, there would be cash flow to support this calendar here that follows the more traditional path. So it looks like it's feasible from the city's finances as well.
I guess we'll say any questions on kind of this with the calendar or how the process works before we get into any actual some bond runs.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts or questions. Wondering from a financing standpoint, what are the risks moving a project forward and doing a reimbursement? I guess however that works. It feels to me like there's probably a level of financial risk involved, incurring project costs before you've got all of your financing in place. So I guess that question was for the finance professional.
Yes, Mikhail, that's for you.
Well, I think, and when we're timing, again, when we're looking at the project and the calendar, what we are timing is more, you've got the project cost estimate that, for this project, the 2.5 million. I think, what we look at, again, it goes back to when we think you're going to have the actual bid for the project. We're going to know what that cost amount is. We're going to know what that monthly cash flow is. And when we time the financing, and when you're going to receive the proceeds, it aligns with when the expenditures are going to be required for the project. It's not uncommon that when we're looking at the calendar, if there's a delay in the project or the bids come in higher, whether we pause on the process and reevaluate based on if there's adjustments to the cost or to the calendar. That's something that we continually monitor. So what we put in front of you is the best case scenario for timing that we know today. But if there are variables that change in the project due to increased cost or timing delays or other considerations, it's not uncommon to, whether it's pause or delay, some of the timing for the issuance.
I guess I'll just state on the record, and it probably comes as no surprise, I'm not a fan of starting any project, regardless of the size or the amount of money you're dealing with before your financing is in place. It just feels like too risky of a proposition. There's so many things that could change that we can't sit here tonight and anticipate. Not the least of which, once you start breaking ground and construction starts, I feel like it places the city and the taxpayers a little bit in that rock and a hard place. How aggressive, right, are the rates going to be when it comes to the actual bond issue, as an example? Can you, if you scroll back up on the document you have there, can you clarify a little bit more on the August 6th, that 30-day referendum period? What is that?
So the question on the process through when a city issues or is considering the issuance of capital improvement bonds, there is a 30-day reverse referendum period. So you hold the public hearing on August 5th. There's a 30-day reverse referendum period that needs to expire prior to being able to issue the bonds. And so that's a factor. It's part of the statutory provisions for the capital improvement bonds, but it's I guess it's that waiting period if anyone wants to come in and petition on the sale of the bonds and the CIP of the city.
Michaela, I think we've talked about it before. I can't remember the exact, I've seen it before. If you know the number right off your head. For a reverse referendum, for that to happen, I believe it's a certain percentage. I want to say it's like 5 or 10% of like votes
Yeah.
cast at the previous election. I think something like that.
Yep, it's a referendum may be required by a petition signed by voters equal to 5% of the votes cast in the last general election and filed with the city clerk within 30 days following the hearing. So it's that period of time where if at least 5% of the voters in the last general election file a petition with the city.
And then if that happens, then it has to go to referendum, correct, Michaela?
It would be, yeah, then you wouldn't, because right now this type of financing does not require a referendum. If it's met, or if there's a petition, then it would require a referendum. So this type of financing allows the city to issue the bonds without a referendum, unless that petition would be received that we just discussed. And there is a notice, there's a notice of the public hearing that's published at least 14 days prior to the public hearing. And then you hold the public hearing, then you've got the 30-day wait period. If there is no petition, then the city is allowed to proceed with the issuance process. And that's why we build in that 30-day period.
And if that happens, would that then put a hold on starting the project?
It would mean that in this case, you would not be able to finance it this way. So you would have to look at an alternate way of financing, whether it's cash or through referendum financing.
Okay.
But you wouldn't be able to bond it through this process.
Okay, but we could still pay cash if we needed to
Yeah.
for the city hall.
Michaela, have you ever had one that had a reverse referendum go through? They actually got the signatures and then went to referendum?
Was that a question
Yeah,
for
it's a
me?
question for you, sorry.
Sorry, I missed it. Sorry, I think cut out a little bit.
Have you had a bond issuance that went to a reverse referendum?
No, it's a question that we commonly get asked because there's also a street, we're not talking about that project tonight, but there's also a street reconstruction process that is similar with the public hearing. And we do get the question of, what's the likelihood? And we don't have statistics of that, but I would say when just recently discussing with our team that never say never, but not any of us can recall a time in the last 20 plus 30 years of this being, of it being a successful referendum or reverse referendum, I should say. So it's always it's a likelihood, but it seems generally a very slim likelihood.
How many people voted in the last election?
About 1,400, so there need to be about 70 signatures, and there is a process. It's not 70 people go around and write it single paper. I've seen it. There's a form. There has to be like name, address. I think there's contact information, signature. That would have to come in. So it has to be done in a specific way, and then it has to then again be reviewed, make sure all those signatures are actual valid signatures and those people did sign it, and then at that point. If we were to get a petition that's properly done with 70 or the minimum required amount of signatures, it's all verified, then at that point, you'd have to go put it on the ballot.
I have a question about that because we've had petitions, obviously, in front of us before, where we've had people actually after the fact, when they kind of learned more about the situation, they've asked to have their names taken off because there's like an education piece. Like I think that they would have to really understand like what they were actually petitioning. Like if we weren't going to bond for it, here's what it would look like to pay for it in cash. Is there any type of education or any type of way that somebody would get access to more information after they've already signed it, or how does that work?
So if we end up that situation where we had a valid petition with all the signatures, yeah, I'd have to talk to the city attorney about what that process, if it's talking, if the city's questioning the validity of the petition, obviously that would go to legal counsel.
Yeah,
before
well, that's
we
not
did
questioning the
anything.
validity. It's more of just the information, right? Because a lot of times when people do sign petitions, they may not understand exactly what they're
Well,
signing
that's
for,
what I'm
and we've
getting at
seen
is
that
if
happen.
if we have one, if we get the petition and it's valid and it's been certified and it meets, there really isn't can we try to educate people and try to get them to rescind their signature? Once it's been received, and again, if you see I'd have to dig it up, the actual format, it has to be done. It's kind of very clear of it has to state like what's being challenged exactly, not just don't spend our money. It has to be like we are challenging this bond issuance, there's a very specific, and I can look it up and send it to you, but very specific format of that it must be, and the statute says it must be in that format, otherwise it's not a valid petition.
No.
And, I think as part of that education and, the process starting the conversation tonight and thinking the next step of this is kind of going through the numbers, but, I think the purpose for it is because it's generally these projects are financed through a tax levy. And that's where, if there's the tax levy implications to some is what triggers that potential petition, albeit slim, and how you're able to get not financing it through a referendum. But some of the considerations as we're looking at the structure of the bonds is looking at some of the existing kind of levy capacity of the city to try to mitigate the impact for this financing, which I think I'm only bringing it up because I think it's part of the discussion of how are we mitigating the impact of the financing and how is that part of the educational process that's included within the calendar that we're walking through.
Which is kind of interesting because prior city councils, in the managing of bonds and paying them off, have kept in place the needed levy for those debt service payments. So I just kind of want to make that a note. There may, I feel, very well be people who could see fit to want to question what's going on, just from some of the past decisions that have been made. I think more commonly when you retire a bond issue, the tax levy that was tied to that most often than not goes away.
So any other questions, comments on the schedule? Otherwise, I think it's a good transition into the actual, let Michaela go through the bond runs.
From the time that the bond is sold or we receive funds, is there a turnaround time of how fast we can spend or delay in spending?
Say that again.
So October 31st, we had receipt of proceeds. Is there a certain time frame that we must start expensing? My question is let's say the delays happen and High Tech says it's not good for us to start this year, we want to start next year. If we follow this process and the project doesn't actually commence until next year, can we still follow the process as laid out?
Oh, as in like issue bonds now, but not do the project till next spring?
So, right, the question kind of comes down to how do you properly, Mr. Scott brings up, like, how do you start a project if you don't have the financing set in place? But you can't commit to the project until we know what the finance, how does that work? Like in traditional sense, if we could start over the year and we wanted to do this, at what point can we say we issue bond, we receive bond funding, but the project is actually going to start, like, can we receive bond funding October 31st, but the project actually doesn't commence until April? Granted, you're paying on the interest rates, like, but how do you start
I think
this process?
normally how it would be done, like say if we were doing this in the spring, okay? Like I think our original goal was. You do go through the same process we're doing now, get a bid. Okay, now you know what, because you gotta get the bid first because that is the hard number. So then you know what you need, whether it's gonna be, you're gonna bond it 100% or cash it / bond it, however you wanna structure the financing. Then you go through this process, and you say, okay, we accept it, and kind of conditional on financing, knowing that, okay, this process takes roughly 90 days, 60 to 90 days. So, maybe that's why we bid in like January, February, do the bond issuance, so then we issue bonds, get receipt of in April, construction starts in May. So that's kind of how that would go. Again, this situation is if we want to get this project going this year, we kind of have that deadline of it's going to be the end of summer. If the council goes, well, we want to do it the other way where we're going to get the financing straightened up before we kick off the project, then we would be looking at next spring, to which, again, things may change. I don't know. Can't speak to what costs might do or things like that, but that's the other option would be to rebid the project or bid the project in January, February, get the bid back, go through the bond process, accept the bid contingent on financing, go through the financing, get the map, get the money, project starts a week later.
But the risk is that it could be significantly higher based on the.
Yeah, costs will
yeah.
change. Okay, I can't tell you which way they'll go, how much one way or the other, but costs will change.
I agree with Brad, though I don't feel comfortable starting without financing in place. And I think in this community it would be easy for people, and I think they would get 70 signatures. That's not a big deal. So there is a risk there. It's been a very controversial project, and I think 70 signatures could be reality.
Any other? Okay, Michaela, do you want to go through this is the City Hall run? I don't know which tab you want me to be on. This one?
Are you sharing your screen with her?
Daniel can,
Oh,
yeah, do it. Michaela, you want to go through the City Hall?
Yep, so this, if this is actually, if you could go to, this is the capacity analysis where we get into the levy, the total debt service based on levy. So I'm wondering if we could go to, I can pull it up too if you'd rather. If you look at the 10-year, yeah, the first one, that 2024 GO 10-year.
Okay.
So I pull it up. This, what we have here is the estimated debt schedules for, both the city hall, again, financed through the capital improvement, and the, acquisition of the fire truck through the equipment. And right, each of these tabs. So here's this, you can look at different, terms, but what we've included here are, we looked at both 10 and 15-year terms. The debt structure in front of you is the 10-year term. If we want to start with the sources and uses, tab, the first on the left, again, we're looking at, if you look at the uses of funds, deposit to the project construction fund, we've got about 2.5 million for the city hall, and then the 1.409 for the equipment. And then the related cost of issuance, underwriter discount, and then the total uses of funds are 2.575 for the capital improvement portion, and then 1.445 for the equipment. And you'll see that's the same as the par amount of the bonds, 2.575 and 1.445. Total issue of 4,020,000. Then if we look at the debt service for the capital improvement, we can walk through that one first. So again, based on a 10-year term, we do have the annual or semi-annual debt service payments, on 6/15, 12/15, that is consistent with the city's past debt structure. And what we want to see here is the estimated annual levy. So we do have annual level debt service over 10 years. We have 105% over levy, which is required statute for GO bonds. So that far right column, the estimated annual levy is right about 330,000 rounding. So that would be the annual levy, assuming financing 100% of the 2.5 million. Over a 10-year period. And then on the, for the equipment certificate for the acquisition of the fire truck, that annual debt service, you'll see same methodology is about 182,000, again, over a 10-year period of time. So that's, and then the estimated interest rate, and we were, I think, fairly conservative, at least at this point, on the interest rate. And it's one of the other things we monitor as you get closer to the timing for the issuance. But we're just over about 3.8% interest for the 10-year term, and you'll see that at the bottom for the equipment, 3.8, and then I think for the 15, so if you go down, so it's about a 3.8% interest rate is what we're assuming for this version, and again, this is assuming a date of October 3rd of 2024, this fall financing. If we want to do a comparison and look at the 15-year structure for the same two projects. If you look at the debt service comparing, it was 330,000 average annual debt service. This one you'll see is closer to 245. And then if you look at the equipment, it's about 135,000. So again, the purpose of this is just to understand, what the difference in the annual levy would be between 10 and 15 years based on the financing for the full 2.5 million. And then the interest rate. Oh, sorry.
And had you mentioned that there's 2 debt service payments a year?
That's a good question. There are so the way that we structure the bond debt service is that there are semi-annual payments, and there's interest only in June, and then principal and interest payments in December.
So you would actually, from a levy standpoint, have to combine those two payments to get to your total need, correct?
So that's that fiscal total. So you see,
Yeah,
for
yep.
2025, these two payments equals 138. For 2026, these two payments equals the 134.
Yeah, that's correct. So each year you add your levy, you levy for the next year debt service, and it's including both of those payments.
So for example, let's use it, we'll go to the City Hall one. If the council were to move forward, what we need to do is part of the 2025 budget, make sure we have we're levying $245,501.34 for City Hall, and then $134,000 for the fire truck. Again, the fire truck, those payments that come in, we bill those directly to the fire district. So that's what we would just have to make sure we're putting in. The levy would be that 245 for 2025, the 245.5 and the 138.3 if we round.
Yep.
And that's assuming the 15-year.
That's assuming if you do a 15-year versus a 10-year.
Right.
Correct. And as to what Councilmember Scott was mentioning, that leftover was in 2022, the city paid off its last debt. It levied $230,000 for that. And the council the last 2 years has decided, looking forward to that, thinking that we were going to see future debt payments, to keep that $230,000 in the levy, so that if you choose to issue debt in the future, you don't have to add that to the levy. That's already built into the levy. So that's what Councilmember Scott was referring to. So instead of taking it off the levy, they just kept it in there.
And that amount aligns fairly close to the 15-year for the capital improvement. Now it's about 245. But I think that was the kind of that capacity analysis we looked at, is how does this measure to that existing levy?
Correct.
So realistically, we would not, specific to this project, see a levy increase year to year. It would,
No.
okay.
Because the levy increase has already been incurred by the taxpayers over the last several years. So to say there's no tax levy increase, again, is very misleading without it being a little bit more qualified. And I'm not so sure that we're still not going to see a levy increase. Irregardless, I think it's just a bad time for taxpayers in general to be footing any additional tax bill. There's one word that we're probably all familiar with: inflation.
Any questions on this?
None for me.
Okay. So at this point, speaking of where we are with City Hall, we'll be getting a bid from High Tech in July. So probably about mid-July is when they've planned on having that bid to us. At the July council meeting, we'll discuss when we talk about the workshop and stuff. Part of that will be that bid opening. So then in July, we'll have that bid. And then we can, if you want to talk about more on the July 1st council meeting, we can. If you're wanting to talk about delaying the project, obviously sooner rather than later would be a good decision on that. Again, you don't have to, you can wait until you get the bid if you want to. There's nothing that says you must accept the bid. So that's kind of the next step here. Is, if you're wanting to wait for that to come in first before you kind of decide what you want to do. Again, if we are wanting to do this, going back to the calendar, there are some things we're going to have to start doing kind of on the in July, start issuing notices and things like that for, to hit dates. But we can always, if you want to take this, again, we just got this prior to the meeting. I can give this all, again, I'll give this all information for you if you want to digest this more to discuss, again, at the July 1 council meeting or a workshop in July at the time the bid is. Otherwise, we're kind of looking for what do you want to, how do you want to, any other discussion you want to have? You just want to wait till the bid comes in July? Do you want us to move forward with any specific path? Again, a lot of this is pending the bid coming in because we can't do anything until we know what that number is. But
Wasn't it a hard bid though? So realistically, the number they gave us is going to be fairly close to what that
I
bid
think the
is.
number that they gave us will be that 2.5. It's going to be very close to that 2.5. Next week, I actually have a meeting with Seth and High Tech to get kind of an update of where things are at. Prior, they'll know by then, are we coming in within that 2.5 number? I know their intention was that 2.5 number was supposed to be a conservative number. And as we finalized that number, that was the up in bold, 2.5 million with everything in those final designs. So we're confident that it's going to be at that number, if not lower. But I'll know more next week when we meet. If High Tech has some concerns about whether or not they think they're going to be able to hit that number, then we have to talk about, okay, where are we going to, where can we reduce costs and stuff. But I don't think we're going to be in that position. But the number that they give in July, that is the hard number.
And we've spent a year working on this, right? Around a year?
About 18 months.
Yeah. So we've been working at this for a while. My fear is if we don't move forward and we wait, our costs are going to significantly go up. Staff obviously needs the extra space. So I would be in favor of moving forward, given the fact that, we were very much reassured by going through the Gordian process with Sourcewell and High Tech that that number was going to be a hard cost. So that was one of the reasons why it was voted to that we would move forward. So I think at this point, it would be responsible for us to go ahead and move forward with that.
And I would certainly tend to disagree. I think it's irresponsible in a number of ways to move forward, not the least of which is what I commented on earlier, not having our financing and understanding of how projects are even going to be paid for in place. The fact that I question the year and a half that City Hall has been worked on, when you would think, if that being the case, there would be a pretty robust plan. And as I sit here tonight, I don't know that we even understand how the remodeled City Hall is going to be fully used. So there's just, again, there's reference to all this time that's been spent and effort poured in, but I see very little that should be in place to actually guide these projects in large expenditures of dollars. So I certainly wouldn't mind seeing the project held off. There's nothing that I've heard, seen, know to be the case otherwise, so urgent that we have to start breaking ground this year. No offense to city staff or others who use the facility, I think we all understand that room is an issue, functionality is a challenge. But this is our building that we have, and this is the building that's been used for many, many years. I don't think holding the project off several months is going to create any more of a challenge than what's already been brought up and part of the discussions.
I think I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Not knowing where those rates are going to come at, it kind of makes me wonder what that final is going to come out at for what we're going to receive and what the rates are going to be. I haven't seen the bid yet, so I kind of want to see that before I make anything. Like, I don't want to hold off getting the bid, because even if we do hold off, we can say, well, that's where it was in July of '24, and if we go to rebid it in February, yay for us that we held off, or no, that's going to cost us more. But I don't think starting this process is warranted yet.
I agree. I mean, I support the project, but to proceed without financing in place, costs can go up, but they may not. Interest rates, everybody thought there'd be multiple cuts so far this year. There may be, rates could go down. But I do agree with Brad that, to me, it seems rushed. And I would like to see the bid as well. I do not want to assume that it is 2.5 or less. I want to see that bid before proceeding.
I have a question on rates, because one of the things with investments, even from a residential standpoint, a lot of times during markets going up and down, if you have a lower cost but a higher interest rate, over time you're going to pay more. And if you have, a lower interest rate and a higher cost, so there's the fluctuation of both, right? So is there, similar to when you, buy a home, is there any way to refinance the debt? Because typically that's kind of what we would say in investments, is that if you can buy at a lower rate, even though you have a little bit higher of an interest rate, that refinance later actually ends up saving you money down the road. So is that something that can happen?
It's the idea of you buy the cost, state the rate kind of thing. Kayla, do you want
I
to?
can address that within the bond structure, we do include a call provision. I think one of the things we balance is, there's a standard call. I think we have 7 years in here that at that point they could be refunded. One of the similar analysis that you just went through is, if you include an earlier call provision, you're going to pay more in interest, and what's that balance? So I think that's where we try to find the sweet spot of what is a realistic time frame to include a call provision with the unknown or uncertainty of future markets. But the short answer is yes, there's always there's a call feature that'll be added into it. And at that point, that's what allows, if the rates are lower, the city to refinance the debt based on the lower rates.
That's really good to hear, because I do think, again, one of the things that we advise with regards to real estate especially, is that, because typically when we see that costs, again, go up, is when we see that interest rate also simultaneously move. So I think it is at least reassuring to know that even though interest rates may be a little higher now, should they go down in the future, we're potentially getting the cost of the build at a lower cost now. That refinance is going to end up saving us money down the road. So at least that, I feel like that is actually a really good reassurance that we could continue to make those decisions as we go, instead of just having a hard number on the percentage, the rate percentage that we see now.
Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing at this point is we'll just, unless there's something I'm hearing wrong, but what I'm hearing, at least from the majority, is sit pat until July when we get the bid, and then see where that comes in, and then from there, just talk about next steps, what bonding looks like, and if you want to move forward or not.
Yeah, and I want to say for the record, I'm okay with that. That's not what I kind of was answering. It was more of the fact that we've been working on this, so I want to continue to move forward in the process. Not that I, like, today have to move forward, but more of just, it would, yes. We're not very far away from July, so I'm fine with that. Councilman Ball, do you have anything?
Just waiting for the bid to come in, that doesn't put us behind on this schedule.
I think what'll have to happen is once the bid comes, depending on when the bid comes in, probably what my recommendation will actually be is at the July meeting when we talk about that mid-July workshop is actually structuring that more like a special meeting. So when the bid comes in, we'll probably need a decision at that meeting of, do we want to move forward or not? Because based off of the calendar, the event calendar that Michaela's put together so far, that kind of shoots that for that October 7th, delaying making that decision does two things. One, puts off the timeline for bond issuance, again, being with council meetings and stuff like that, since we only meet once a month, you'd have to call a special meeting potentially. But also could affect, we have to have High Tech would be there on that, would be here obviously on the day you open the bid. But having the discussion, I'll have discussion with them probably next week too. Get them up to date of, just what to expect, of what that might do to their timeline. And again, what I've already heard from them was that if they can't start in that late August, beginning of September, be able to get the ground prepped, break ground, get concrete poured, all that, they probably would rescind their bid because it wouldn't be doable.
Right, because you can't start 3 months later in the middle of winter, so
Yeah.
they would have to start.
This past winter was a complete anomaly. You cannot anticipate that, having that again. So that's where they look at it as, I don't know many masons, I've heard, essentially November 1 is that hard cutoff after November 1. I don't know many masons that will certify their concrete pours. And even before then, again, if we get one of those early winters, we get snowfalls, early frosts, it can affect the pouring of concrete. And last thing you want for your foundation is questionable concrete. So
One thing I would like to request though, and we do this with development and investments as well, is there any way to know, like once we kind of have that bid, right? We can say, okay, at this interest rate, we know what, at this bid, this is what the interest rate is. Can we get scenarios potentially to say, okay, in 3 years, if we refinance and we refinance at this rate, this is how that affects over the term of the loan? Can we get, if we didn't do it and the cost goes up and the cost goes up $500,000 in the spring, this is now what that interest rate is there any way to get some kind of like analysis of the next 10 to 15 years on where we would refinance and where those costs would come in as a projection?
I guess, Michaela, that'd be a question for you, or someone probably lean on you on. Are those kind of financial projections something that's, with bond markets feasible?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question and analysis, and I think one of the things I think we could provide you with some alternate scenarios, based on where we think. I think more of what it would be is, like I said, if we're looking at, let's just say you chose the 15-year bond structure, and if we look at what's the earliest call feature that you could add, what would that add to the interest rates, versus a normal call provision? If rates, we can certainly sensitize if rates, if costs go up or rates go up, ultimately what we'd look at is what the annual levy and debt service would be based on different variables. And that's certainly a chart summary that we can put together so you can see where that, I don't know if it's break even points or where the tipping points would be in the timing, in the discussion for the financing.
With all that, I think it's, again, we're talking about bond markets here, so it's,
Right. Well, and everything's just a guess, right?
Trying to chase, I think
Yeah.
most recommendations I've heard is bond chasing rarely works out. Obviously, rate chasing rarely works
Right,
out.
no. At the end of the day, you finance when you time it as like, right, it's exactly, you time it for when you need the proceeds, and that's why when we start the conversation, we start with the end date of the settlement, because that's when you need the funds, and then you follow through the steps. That being said, when we're looking at the timing of the calendar and the day that you are going to sell, there's considerations we need to make from the federal standpoint to other sales that day. So there are factors at times of year that we generally avoid or try to stay within. So there's more considerations, but at the end of the day, we look at when do you need the funds and what makes the most sense for selling the bond.
I would like to ask High Tech as well, where they think that that would change in the spring, because I have rarely seen where waiting saves you money. I think we see this in government all the time. We wait for elections to make decisions. Like you said, the rate chasing rarely works out. So sometimes when we have a hard bid especially, and we can get from, high tech, obviously they're the experts in this area, so they understand where their rates have come in for different projects, that I think they could potentially give us a good overview of where they think they would potentially come in by waiting in the spring. And I think that that would also then contribute to how we would make the decision and why we would want to do it a certain way. So I think having that from high tech would actually be a really good information.
I did want to touch on something Michaela just said quickly, talking about looking at when issuing. One of the things she and I talked about this afternoon was that they had looked at the calendar, and they did talk about our meeting in September, the day after Labor Day, so we won't be meeting on Monday. It'll be Tuesday, September 3rd. If we could if we were able to expedite things in a way to issue a bond issuance that day. But the reason they're actually recommending not doing it that day, just because in their expert looking ahead, looking at what bond sales are already scheduled for that day and such, they recommended no, because that's not going to be a good market day. A saturated market, you're going to not get as favorable bids and such. So that's what, again, just reissuing, that's what they look at, is they do look at when's the best time for the city also to be issuing. If it's going to be they're seeing a bad market day or day that's a lot of bonds are being issued, they'll probably recommend we don't issue that day. So.
Perfect. Does anybody have anything else?
Nothing else. I think we've got direction for moving forward, and we'll keep Woodseth and High Tech in the loop on that. Michaela, I just want to thank you for taking your time with us this evening and working through us all that information.
Yep. Again, thank you for your time as well.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on our agenda tonight is the Streets Committee. So this is a continued discussion from our May council meeting, which is continued from our April 24th workshop. So at the workshop on April 24th, we talked about, that's when we originally talked about the streets CIP, we reviewed that. Then on your May 6th council meeting, we issued the CIP. Then we brought up the idea, that continued discussion of, okay, we threw out the idea of the streets committee to kind of be part of this process made up of residents. At that time, I presented a draft resolution of what it would look like to create an ad hoc committee, depending on what the council wanted that committee to do. That time, my recommendation was, maybe start with ad hoc, see how it goes through the street CIP process, and then once that whole process is done, if the committee is going well, you can always reestablish it as a standing committee of these are the things, by ordinance, kind of like our previous committees, this is what they work on. This is what their purview is. On May 6th, the council, I think general sense I got was general in favor of that, but wanted to have more discussion about what the expectations were. Prior to forming a committee, what is the expectations? What is the committee going to be doing? With regards to this, what does the council want to be seeing from this committee? And so you motioned to have it at a future workshop. And then on June 3rd, you scheduled it for this workshop tonight. So again, I drafted that resolution. I attached that draft resolution just again for some reference, maybe some talking things to go off of. Also, Mr. Dave Reese, who is here tonight, was kindly enough to kind of just draft a memo. One of the discussions that we had at both May 6th and April 24th was brought up about what Lakeshore, their road and sewer committee, which is kind of what they have, how they're structured. So Dave just put a little bit of kind of what Lakeshore does, but just in general what he sees of these committees. Dave obviously is here to speak to that or ask any questions you might have. But ultimately tonight, we're just looking forward is, I'll just say this, in the part of the process where we're at, we got four proposals in. Those were due June 6th. So we're in review of those. We'll be presenting those to you on July 1st. that'll be on your agenda in 2 weeks from today. Kind of the idea would be hopefully to create this committee, if the intention is to have this committee, to have them working as part of the street CIP to get them going. Again, a little process about that once the council creates it. Obviously, with any other committee, we'd want to do a period where put applications out there, notice it, receive applications, and then the council will be able to appoint people to that committee. So I think at this point, we're just looking for you to have some discussion on what you would like to see from the Streets Committee, and if indeed you'd like to move forward with the Streets Committee for then some formal action on July 1st.
So I did meet with a resident who was on the Streets Committee prior. I actually don't know how many years ago that was. Do you remember the date that we had a Streets Committee? I mean, it was probably like 20 plus years ago.
I guess since I've been here, we had a road committee that was just a subcommittee of the council. So when was the last time we had a?
That's all we've had in my time has been a subcommittee council. I do remember seeing in the old documents they had, it was almost like a combination of staff and residents possibly, but I could do some digging around.
So we're talking over 15 years ago.
Yeah, it was. And I bring that up because one of the things that came out of the conversation was that they felt like they were wasting their time on the committee. And typically I've now heard that with kind of multiple things that have been done in the past where no action has been taken on things. And that's kind of where sometimes we just have to kind of make decisions on things and move forward with projects. So that was the feedback that I had received from him. And so when I had discussed with him about us putting together this roads committee, I think the biggest thing for residents who are going to join is they don't want to waste their time. So really just figuring out, what that looks like is really important, just because, again, we've had it before and it didn't go anywhere. So I think, just keeping that in mind and being mindful of like their time is going to be critical.
I think it's a good idea. We have a planning commission, we have Parks and Recs. I don't think the council can possibly do the deep dive that's required. I think Mr. Reese's memo pretty much lays it out. We need to proceed with redoing our streets. That's our job. They're coming due. There's going to be a lot going on in the next few years. I would say to the resident you met with, 15 years ago, this was a totally different city.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not a comparison. I think it will help, and I think we have a lot of people in this community that have backgrounds in roads and sewer. I think as the sewer expansion gets going, I think that would also be looked at, that we could add that into this committee. But I think it's needed, and I think we should proceed with it. At the end of the day, it's still the council's decision, but we have somebody investigating, putting the recommendations forward to the council, and we can do our due diligence and make the decision.
I like how the resolution's drafted. I like that's ad hoc for now, so it's specific to a project that we know we have deliverables for. And then I think, if it's working well, then we can look at that point, whether it continues once we have the CIP in place.
Yeah, exactly, because it can be changed
Right.
at council's direction.
For clarification, this is an advisory committee like the Parks and Rec, not an actual actionable like the P&Z?
So generally ad hoc committees are advisory committees. So I think the way this resolution is kind of laid out is that, again, it kind of opens the door for the committee to kind of essentially be your working group. So when there's technical questions with the engineers about wanting to talk about sidewalks, so what are we talking about sidewalks? Where do we, is there any, are we wanting them everywhere? Are we wanting them on specific, just corridors? Are they 3-foot sidewalks? Are we talking 10-foot trails? Things like that, those kind of details that they're gonna need to know so they know where to put them. Street lights, you know, that was part of the proposal, the RFP. Okay, where are we talking about? Is that intersections? Is that mid-blocks? Things like that. They would be the advising body, working with staff, working with the selected engineer to work through those issues. But ultimately, obviously, they would come back to council. I think part of the discussion, I think was discussed in May, is like how often, you know, if you go through this, how often are you wanting it to come back? Are there certain milestones? Is it you want to hear monthly reports from the committee? You know, I can't, at this point, I think it depends on which engineer you select in their process of whether this group is meeting on a specific day every month, as needed, things like that. You can have how often do you want them to report back to you, things like that, before you make a decision, so at least you know what they're working on. Do you want them to, if there's a certain level of decision that has to be made, goes before you, before they tell the engineer to do that? You know, I think there is an element of when you do a committee like this, you are entrusting it to them to essentially make recommendations. So if an engineer is asking, okay, we're talking about streetlights, where do you think the streetlights need to go? You're kind of entrusting that the committee, that whatever they determine is what the engineer is going to design to. Otherwise, they're just going to come back to you and ask you the same question, what's the point of the committee? So that's kind of the idea here, is if you want to do that committee, there's got to be that level of trust and understanding that you're empowering the committee. Again, they're still advisory, they're not making the final decision, but when it comes to those kind of technical questions, you're entrusting them to work through it, and what they kind of come to is allow the engineer to do that. In here, I do have the recommendation, obviously, of council liaison, so there is someone who can represent the council, someone who, if it's a monthly report, maybe it's the liaison presenting, hey, this is what the Streets Committee did this month. Or you can have someone else in the committee doing those reports too, so.
Can we do something more like the living document set up? Because I do feel like the first couple months that a streets committee is going to be together, I think that the things they discuss and the things that we're working on coinciding with our streets plan and, you know, the redoing of the ordinances is going to be it's going to look very different in their meetings than when we actually start looking at like where are we placing certain things. So I think that there's going to be a difference in like what they're discussing, like in the first, you know, can we reevaluate every, you know, 6 months or 3 months regarding that? Because isn't it going to be a while since before they're talking about where to put streetlights?
You know, I think have to go back and look at the proposals. Again, I'm still working through them myself. I think most of the proposals, I think they're all said and done in about 6 months, like by the end of the year. So this isn't going to be like a 2-year or year-long process. It's going to be kind of the idea is get going, get it done, have a draft, you know, plan back to the council by the end of the year. With most of the proposals, that's their timeline.
With regards to the streets plan, correct? Is that?
Yes, but that
Okay.
includes, again, part of the RFP, and we'll talk about when we come to, on July 1st, is we had a lot of those add-ons of, you know, street lighting, the sewer, things like that. And if you add those things, that's part of what they're also going to be working on. So that's what I'm going at, is you create this committee, and the engineer goes, okay, I need some guidance on street lights, as into, are we talking at intersections plus mid-block, only intersections of a certain size or intensity? You know, they're gonna need that's the kind of one thing that they're gonna be looking for input from the committee on, is where do you want the streetlights? So that's what I was getting at. You would be, by creating this committee, essentially entrusting them to give the engineer that feedback. Otherwise, if the council's wanting to make that decision, then what's the committee doing, I guess? So it really kind of comes down to, does the council want to be in control of this, or are you willing to allow the committee to kind of run the show? With reports back to the council, and the council being, hey, you know, did you look at this, and asking questions and maybe redirecting as needed based off of the reports that you're receiving.
I would see the committee, with the right mix of people, and with clarity from the council in terms of what are the things that they should be in fact doing, looking at, engaging the community on, is really a group that could help the city with what are our road standards, right? I mean, what are we building to? What are our streetlight standards? If in fact we're a community that wants streetlights. We talk about sidewalks and trails. Okay, what are the standards going to be around those things? All of those investments require, or the city should have some idea on a consistent basis of what are we building to. And I guess that's how I would really look at what the committee could bring, along with other things. I mean, I think it really could be a good way to increase the level of public engagement. So yeah, for those reasons and for reasons that Steve mentioned, I definitely would be in support. It sounds like in Lake Shore and other communities that use a group like this, I mean, it's been working.
I will say when I was in, we didn't have a streets committee like this when I worked for the city of Brainerd, but we did do, it started actually with our parking committee for specifically looking at parking issues in downtown Brainerd. The council created through the same, I've actually pretty much used this format from them that we created down there. Created an ad hoc committee to study parking downtown. They took about 6 months, came up with some recommendations to address concerns about downtown parking with customers and the residents downtown. A slew, I think they had like 12 different recommendations, went to council, council gave input, came back, went back, had some public hearings on it, got adopted, and then they, one of the recommendations from the street committee was to make them a standing committee so that they could I think they weren't necessarily gonna meet monthly, but at least 2 or 3 times a year at minimum, and then as the need arises, meet to evaluate, okay, we said do this thing, well, is it working? And if it's not working, what's in need evaluating, or maybe it worked better than we thought, and we can back on something else. So that's where I agree with the idea that this committee could be a good thing of start ad hoc, see how it goes, and then if it's going really, really smoothly and there's a lot of enthusiasm and the council's very happy, then absolutely we could move into the next step of making them standing and saying, okay, you're a standing committee now, and these are the things in the future that go before you before they go to the council.
I'm 100% in favor of the committee. I mean, I think that it was more of a question on what's going to be the content in which they're talking over time. Because I do believe that, Councilman Scott said, I see this committee the same as the Parks Committee. I think that you create committees, you give them, the ability to make decisions. I see it being very much the same, and you hold both committees the same in the highest regard in what they do every day. And so, yeah, I'm absolutely in favor of it. My question was more just around the timing of the streets plan and how does that affect the things that they're talking about and the things that they're putting together and the decisions that they're making.
So part of this proposal is that when it comes to the streets plan, they are the working group. So it's not the streets plan's going over here and they're working over here.
Right, so that was my question, because you talk about streetlights, but when I thought of streetlights, we haven't discussed yet assessing what that looks like for residents.
No, and I was talking about streetlights as one of those items included in the RFP that
Oh,
you wanted
okay,
the engineer to
okay.
look into.
Okay, I was
Yeah.
thinking streetlights as in on residential, but we haven't addressed assessments and everything like that, so that's where
This is about the idea of when we
Okay.
do the plan of proposed where they might go.
I see.
If you choose to do them.
Gotcha, okay, that makes sense.
So that was just an example.
Okay.
Of where,
I think the timing is good because you still have to get people that want to be on the committee. They have to get recommended, approved by council. They have to elect a chair, a vice chair, so they have things to do, while we decide on the engineering firm for the CIP.
and once the engineering firm is selected, again, there's still a process of we got to, execute the contracts. They got to get mobilized or, okay, nope, now we're on the schedule and get things scheduled. So by the time, again, they really get working, hopefully we'll have that committee selected and appointed. So I guess at this point, I guess my question is there anything, I'm kind of hearing maybe that there's support to start with the ad hoc route in the draft resolution. Is there anything that you saw in there that you didn't want in there? Anything that you feel like needs to be added or clarified?
I was fine with it.
No, I'm excited to get it going.
Okay. So I think at this point, we'll have this resolution on the agenda for July 1st for you to formally adopt. And then at that point, we will begin the notification and recruitment process for applicants for the Streets Committee. Then hopefully July is a 5-Monday month, so it gives us at least a little extra week to try to get interest. I kind of agree with some of the council members here that I don't think it'll be too hard to drum up interest for a committee like this. And then hopefully have applications before you to consider appointing a committee in August, and then we'll hit it hard and heavy in August. Okay, thank you. Okay, whoops, what am I doing? Going back here, that's what I'm doing. Okay, 2 items down. Third item tonight, brush pile. Again, this was brought up, discussion at your June 3rd meeting. Just some concerns that were brought up around the brush pile. I think specifically for the use of the brush pile by commercial companies and non-residents, speed of vehicles accessing the brush pile, mess of on the streets from uncovered loads and things like that. And the council decided that you wanted to talk about it more tonight. So attached, again, information that we provided before. I'd attach Joe's email that he sent out earlier this year, just kind of his analysis and what we've talked about before from staff's perspective, as well as the information previously about the rules. So again, it was passed back over to the council of further discussion. Is there anything that you would like to see, any action or any questions of staff regarding operations of the brush pile, or ways that you think we could potentially address some of the concerns that have been raised?
Yeah, maybe I'll start, given the fact that I was the one that requested this to be on the last council meeting agenda. And initially, it really stemmed around concerns with the fact that we have, like any community, that part that's aging or is to some kind of physical restriction, if it's not due to age where they can't do yard work themselves, right? So they rely on family members, they rely on, lawn companies, whether they're, of a commercial nature or non-commercial nature, to do that work for them. And having heard from some residents where in fact that was the case, and who they had doing their yard cleanup was questioned about bringing materials to the site, it just got me a little concerned, among other things, with things like Title VI, right? I mean, Title VI, federal law, requires any and all government programs to be accessible by everyone in the community. And if we are bumping up against not allowing companies, however you look at it, that are hired by residents who pay taxes to support the operation of this site, to bring yard material there, I would be a little bit more than concerned that we could be coming close to violating provisions of Title VI. And so that was kind of initially why I thought it'd be good to have some more discussions about this, kind of looking at our rules, how we might want to make some changes. And then I'd also heard from some residents, it's included in the information that went out to council, just about the fact that this is something being operated in more or less of a residential area, right? I understand the council at the time, the decision to try to locate this on property that the city already owned, taking a number of things into consideration. But there is a part of me that wonders if it's in the right spot. I wouldn't mind having staff take a look at what are some other options, even if it's potentially property that's not currently in the city, but it could make sense to potentially acquire it and have it as a dedicated use. I really,
Yeah, I was going to ask if it was possible to look, if there's other available locations too. I mean, just like we moved it before, maybe now is, we're revisiting it, maybe it does make sense to move it. And so I don't see any reason why staff couldn't be doing that either. I agree.
yeah, I was saying, I really don't like the fact that it's in the middle of a residential area. I mean, there's kids, there's all kinds of family activities and comings and going, and it just seems like, you could say kind of an unnecessary conflict to put in the midst of a already busy area, so.
Yeah, I think there's, twofold. I live over there. I know all the residents that live right by the brush pile. One actually just built. We were over there talking to them the other day, and they brought this up. I think they called in actually to City Hall about that. One of the issues I think with this specifically is there is a hill that comes down into the entrance, so cars naturally go faster, which doesn't help the situation. I agree with Councilman Scott. I think that it would be really great if staff could look at, are there potential other entrances? I think that we've looked potentially maybe at that before. I think one of the other things, because I think there's a couple of issues, right? There's the speed, there is the uncovered brush, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that by state statute, by law, you're required to cover your brush when you're transporting. And I rarely see anybody covering their brush. So I think that with the brush falling off and the speed, I know there was another resident down the road, she put a sign out, her own sign, because her grandkids play, and somebody came and basically put another sign up that was saying something really mean to her about letting her kids play in the street or something. I don't remember what it was, but there's just been a lot of issues. So I think for a location of it would be great. I think I would also like to look at what is the cost, similar to what Sartell does, if there was some kind of key fob or some kind of, controlled access. I think that would really help to understand what those costs are. And then my kind of response to the commercial side of it, I think there's a very different side when you have a family member helping you remove brush versus when you hire a contractor. Usually when you hire a commercial contractor, the amount that they're charging is actually what they include in that amount is the cost to haul it away, and they don't necessarily rely on the closest resident-only brush pile. So I don't think, I think there's something to be said about who are you hiring? Are you hiring, your friend? Are you hiring a family member? Or are you hiring the commercial vehicle? Because there is very much a difference when you have these large commercial vehicles coming down the road at that speed versus having, someone in their truck, a neighbor in their truck helping you and bringing that to the location. So I think there's a multitude of problems, and I think that there's kind of a few things that we can look at. But those are just some of my comments from living right next to the brush pile.
I agree with looking at an alternate site. I think that makes sense. I think this, again, the residents abutting it were never told. It just went in. I do disagree on the commercial trucks. Now, if somebody wants to hire a tree service and they're a resident, they should be able to haul it there. I mean, the resident is paying taxes. I wouldn't say that it's always negotiated that they'll get rid of the trees. Some do, some don't. But a resident, whether it's a commercial service or not, has a right to, for that vehicle to get rid of whether it's yard waste, clippings and or trees. But that being said, I think there's abuses and I think there's a lot of commercial vehicles in there that have nothing to do with residents. So I would like to see pursuing locking it down, whether it's fobs, cost, but I'd also like to hear from the residents, whether we do a targeted mailing You know, what do they encounter? What would they like to see? I drive by there, I see the little children playing sign. You know, I can see why they're concerned. I understand why the city made the choice of that location, but I think we should look at something alternate. But in the short term, we should also contact residents, have them provide feedback to staff. What are they seeing? What would they like? And what can we do for them in the short term?
Yeah, I mean, I think first step is just, is there an alternative, like, can we keep the site, but is there another way that we can put a different entrance in? I mean, I think that's our, like, first step. Because again, I've talked to many residents. I mean, Joe Garcia lives right on that hill, across from Michelle, who I know who wrote this email. And so I think that, again, I've talked to many of them, and it really is the speed, it's the brush. And so I think just, can we have an alternative site? What does that look like? Can we have controlled access? What does that look like? I think that's kind of the first step, because if we move the entrance, all of this stuff goes away. So I think that that would be maybe my suggestion on, like, first steps.
Well, some of the concerns, I would agree, go away. I don't know that they all do.
Yeah, I think looking at either an alternative approach into the land, alternate land. Again, it kind of goes back to that one question that we were asked, can we legitimately purchase another property outside of the city of Breezy Point for city of Breezy Point purposes? What does that look like? Can we do it? Where would that be? Is it a joint venture? Can we do something with Pequot? Does Pequot have a brush pile? Can we get something middle ground? I don't know, but I'm not opposed to looking at it and come up with other alternative ideas.
Or ideal. I always love partnerships, right? I think that would be that's a really, really good idea. Councilman Maroney, is, any neighboring cities, do they have something? Is there something that we can joint, venture with them on? I think that's another option. So good idea.
Did the council look at that, Joe, at all, at the time that current site was?
As
What
far
page is it
as partnershiping?
Yeah.
The ideal transfer station is already available to our residents if they want to use it. You have to pay the fees, but now, you're driving a great distance, which something like a brush site, you've all addressed driving with, brush in the back of your vehicle. It's bulky, it likes to fall out. I've dealt with the same thing my whole career in our dump trucks. We fill them up and you're driving down the road and you're worried something's going to blow out because you don't want to make 1,000 trips when you can do it in 500. And that a close site is convenient to people, carrying leaves. Like, they're almost impossible to tarp down where you don't lose that kind of thing. I mean, it's kind of a side effect of the site. But as far as contacting Pequot, we did not. They have offered something comparable, I believe, but I don't know for certain. I know Cross Lake is more official. Nisswa was kind of a understanding out at the sewer plant. People came and used it, but it was nothing official while I was there. I'm not sure where they're at now. So, I mean, that was the impetus for that site. It's convenient, that sort of thing. And I guess one question, a lot of the site was chosen by cost factors. I mean, it essentially cost us our time to do it. I can't think of a place in town that's going to address your concerns, really. I mean, if we move it around, it's going to be next to a different neighborhood, cause the same problems. And then, if we have to buy the property, the cost, it is what it is. Land's not cheap anymore.
Is there a way to get on the other side, though? Because there's really not, like, where the sewer
It'd be
plant
very
is.
difficult.
Okay. I guess I didn't know, because that's what I was thinking when.
I mean, realistically, we'd be sacrificing sewer spray fields. We'd have to cross a swamp to come out on Thrain, which most likely will be a non-residential road pretty much forever. But as far as I can tell, the topography, you'd almost want to come straight down the hill from that site. And you might be able to cross that swamp, which is future sewer land. I haven't walked it, and then we'd have to come up through our spray field somewhere, so we'd be sacrificing, a couple laterals, which if we have room to build more. I mean, and it's gonna be something we'll do in the future because our spray field capacity is gonna need to be increased. And there's different ways to increase it, but Neil and I could look at it, but I'm pretty sure we're crossing a swamp, and that usually makes construction, like that, take us out of doing it. We're not gonna blaze a trail across the swamp. That'd have to be done by someone a little better prepared.
But two things, again, I think part of what Joe said, it's that difficulty of being a residential community. We don't have an industrial park. But also, Joe, I don't think they've had any formal conversations, but wasn't there, I know some look, at least from the staff level in Pequot, looking at the potential idea of a brush pile? Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't recall one.
Okay.
That could be conceivable, kind of at the boundary line. I mean, it's vacant for now, but I have no idea on property availability or anything.
Yeah, a good conversation to have with Pequot, I think, for sure.
Pequot, we can talk about Pequot, Pelican Township's a neighbor as well. See what other communities are. So I guess what I'm hearing right now is we can, we'll go look and look at our city first of all, see if there's any other locations that we think might be viable. We have some conversations with our neighbors to see if they're interested in potentially doing some kind of joint venture, or if there's other land out there, and then we'll come.
I think not our best option, but the county pit off Bushman could be revisited. It doesn't address everything. I mean, it's a well-developed neighborhood right south of the prevailing wind. Previously, they were not interested in giving it to us, but we didn't really pursue what the cost was either at the time, because that was an important factor.
I think there's definitely options we can do some research. Joe and I've, we've had discussions about what does access controlling the site look like. We can put some numbers together to that, give you, that as well, and then come back to you probably at this point. Realistically, we're talking August, being only 2 weeks out from the council meeting, and we've got some vacations and stuff coming up too in the next 2 weeks. So we can come back. I think we can shoot to come back in August, no problem, and present some of our findings and recommendations and go from there. Okay.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Okay, so 3 down, last but not least, community center due diligence. And this is coming from on April 1st, when due diligence in a community center was discussed as a proposal from Mayor Zierd and Councilman Maroney. I gave what was the proposal at that time. At that time, the council voted to table the discussion for a future workshop, and then on June 3rd, you scheduled it for tonight. So I think what we're looking for the council tonight, again, just discuss what does due diligence and potential community center mean. I think one of the big things for staff and part of this conversation is going to be, if there's due diligence, is something we want to pursue, what does community center mean? I think we hear in previous conversations and even in the public that kind of means different things. And so I think any due diligence that is pursued, having a common or an agreed upon definition of what community center means is going to be very important for what we do. So, Mayor Zierd provided some documents that I printed off that were given to you. I'll let her speak to those. But I'll hand it over to the council to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest issues that we've seen recently is, again, Administrator Chansky alluded to, was what is a community center? I think there's a broad range and definition, and not all community centers have a pool, not all community centers have whatever that looks like. So I think by defining that, I think that's going to help kind of steer the conversation. In this packet, I included kind of the 3 options that I felt should be part of the discussion. In this, I also have letters of support. So I can kind of start with the Landis-Gear building. In your packet, I have 3 letters of support from 2 investors, 2 private investors who have looked and are looking at potentially purchasing it, which that would be a private sale, and they absolutely are in favor of looking at the potential for a public-private partnership. So whether, and as you can see too, one of the private investors, he has asked to remain private for right now because he is currently looking at this and doing the due diligence, is how can he put in facilities that would benefit the community, which I think it would be beneficial for us to look at. So if there was facilities in there that were similar to a community center, what would that cost look like to us? What does define what a community center would be in that building? So the private public partnerships, I think, is a really good way to look at how do we reduce costs to give residents access. And that building, especially with the potential for an indoor walking track, for I don't know if a pool would be, that probably would not come into play in that. But again, we have these private investors who are looking, and then, you know, the conversation is not just about a community center. This is also about infrastructure. This is about city sewer and water. Because the cost to Pequot to run city sewer water down to that, I believe about 500 million, which is significant. So for them, that isn't really feasible right now. It may be in the future over time. So one of the other issues is whoever does buy that from a private is, can they connect to our sewer? And so for something like due diligence, this would also help cover some of the due diligence that we would have to look at anyway for whoever did purchase that building. So if they did hook up to our city sewer, you know, is that part of the due diligence? The other aspect of that is Region 5 has also committed to help with any type of infrastructure grant. So city sewer water connectivity and extension can be covered by grants. There's actually a lot of funding right now available for that. Second kind of option, I have a letter of intent from their resort. We had a meeting about potentially looking at a second sheet of ice, which has been absolutely discussed in this community for a long time. The biggest factor with the second sheet of ice is that there's only about 7 in the state that are private because they're not profitable. So the other problem with that is state statute does not allow an ice arena to, it does not qualify for TIF these days. So what we could do is, okay, if we partnered with the resort and they got the second sheet of ice, is there a way to kind of add on to what they want to do that would provide facilities for our residents to use? So what does that cost look like? What, you know, what does that look like for the city? What does that partnership look like for the city? Either way, they are very much in favor of working through the due diligence. And I think from the final number 3 that's on here is, you know, something that this has been talked about a long time. I thought due diligence had been done for this, but looking at, okay, if we built a community center on our own without a public-private partnership, what are the costs to that? So I really think that we're not saying yes to any of these options. We're not saying this is what we're going to do. What we're doing is we're looking at all of our options. We're gathering our partners. We're looking at, you know, how do we reduce costs? How do we be innovative more so than just going and building? And so, you know, I'm asking tonight if we can please move forward with getting that due diligence done so that we have those numbers, so whatever the future may hold for us, we can actually reference some of those things. So that's kind of where these 3 things are at. So I'm happy to have the conversation.
And we understand that we're talking about a property that is in the city of Pequot Lakes?
Of course.
Okay. And we don't know exactly where the city would be at in allowing us to annex the property, correct?
Well, we're not discussing any annexation. This would be purchased by a private investor. So this is not about annexation. I've had this conversation with the mayor of Pequot. All we're doing is due diligence to say, like I said, I have 3 private investors willing to buy the building, and for various reasons. And when you have that kind of purchase, when you have something, like a tenant, could we be a tenant? We could be a tenant. Do we know yet if that's even feasible? We don't know, but this due diligence would help us do that. So if we were a tenant instead of owning the building, there would be a significant cost reduction because we would not have to staff it full time the way that we would if we owned the building. We would have, we would, again, be more like a tenant. So it really would not have much to do with that as far as like what it being a Pequot. It would be more of what kind of partnership would we have to use the facilities.
Well, I really honestly question who is driving and otherwise benefiting from this due diligence. I think we all remember a special council meeting that happened this year where this very topic of conversation came up. And we had any number of very displeased and downright irate residents show up. I don't think that has likely changed. There's a part of me that wonders what available amenities in this area that people are even familiar with, such as we're in the Pequot Lake School District. School district has facilities, they have walking tracks. We got a resort, right, that you mentioned that's got pools. We've got other business owners that operate facilities with pools in them. I just continue to struggle with why the conversation of a community center continues time and again when there is more than one option and opportunity for residents right now to get the things that I've heard about mentioned in the community center, those needs met. Yes, it requires driving a little extra distance and taking a little bit more time. Is that a reasonable trade-off as opposed to building is the first thing. Operating, to me, is the bigger challenge. A $7, $8 million facility. I say it probably is a dang good trade-off. So I'm utterly confused as to why this continues to come up.
I, for one, would love to get some more information on operating costs. I feel like again and again it comes up as that's the impediment to having some sort of community center, and none of us know what the actual costs are for various options. So I just think to have a good full picture that we would need to do some additional work to know what that looks like. And I guess I don't see any issues with looking at any of these items that have been presented here as further, just to see what they look like. I don't see the harm in that. I mean, then we can actually say like this is too cost prohibitive, and have hard numbers to.
Well, one of the things, and if memory serves correctly, something that Mayor Zierden and I brought forward to ask for that due diligence package, and one of the biggest questions is, can even the city partake in the purchase of a Landis & Gyr building outside of our jurisdiction? We all encountered when we all took office, we were trying to do a retreat and we were going to potentially plan for outside of a city, and state statute says, no, we cannot as a body meet out of the city. So one of the things that might just come back is, no, we cannot purchase an entity or a business or partake in anything outside of our city. There is a lot of people who are against, and there are some, and maybe a lot, that are for. But regrettably, we've heard the loud majority is if we can come back to them and say, Landis & Gyr building is totally off the table, it's not even a potential due to state statute, it'd be great to have that answer that we can direct staff to say, can you just research it and tell us? If it is, that's a whole nother discussion, but at least it can shut down those saying, well, we should be doing it, why aren't we doing it? We can say, we can't, move on, we're done. And so it just solves that question of, can you? Because right now it's in back of other people's minds of, Why didn't we take advantage of this? Why didn't we pursue it? The answer might very well be, you can't. And therefore, we're done with that discussion portion. I do like your idea, though, Mr. Scott, of composing options of what we have local to the Breezy Point community, and I'm going to say that Cross Lake, Pequot, going outside of, do we ask staff to compose of who the partners are, of what we have to offer? It's not SNAP anymore. It's the gym, I think it is, in Pequot Lakes. What is their rates, or at least direct people to the website and what they offer. That way we could say, hey, if we don't have a community center today, here's our local options within X amount of miles. Yes, anybody privately could put together, but if we ask staff, hey, let's put a little time into it to address these concerns, reach out to the resort owners and say, hey, you have pools here. Do you allow citizens to swim there? And at what cost? I've heard from some timeshare owners, they say you need to own a timeshare. That's not in anybody's idea to use a pool to buy a timeshare. They don't want to, they just want to pay a membership. Is one of our resort owners and management companies willing to sell a just pool membership, not owning a deeded property? If that's possible, can our staff look into that possibility and approach them and say, is this something you would offer to our citizens? That way we can come back and say, city is no longer interested in a pool, but we've also negotiated with XYZ company and they're willing to do a pool lease. So I think that's a great idea of composing what those are and asking the school what is their stipulations. Can anybody go into the school anytime to use the walking track? Getting their rules and regulations might be a good thing to put down on it. And so maybe this due diligence is building upon that idea that you have and allowing it and putting it on our website and telling people, we don't have anything today. We've got a community room, we've got our park pavilion, but for a gym, here's what's available in Pequot, here's what's available in Cross Lake. For swimming pools, here's the nearest one that charges X amount. And I know we did swimming lessons up in Jenkins, just south of the movie theater. That was a paid community program. Yeah, so maybe they sell swim passes. Yes, it's driving distance, but if we don't have it, maybe what's our outside boundaries? So I really like that idea.
Actually, the timeshares now sell them for $0 because people are defaulting, not paying their fees, and then you assume the $800
It'll
or.
cost you more than $0 to maintain it after you buy.
Yeah,
For like
you're getting
$1.
it for free or
Whatever,
$1, but you're gonna pay.
But it's also
$800.
deeded, it's deeded property. And if you don't want to worry about that, I don't want to sell it later on. I don't want to give it away. I just want to pay for a pool pass for 3 years, then walk away. So will they consider it? I don't know. Has anybody ever asked that question? I would venture to be no. So I do know that
Did
exists.
purchase one with a couple other people, but I know for a fact that currently the resort does not allow for anyone to use the facilities unless you're staying. So, yeah, but I agree. I think that that's actually a really good point. I think we have a lot of new families that are moving to the area, as we've seen in kind of our demographics and our development. And when you are new to the area, if it's kind of piecemealed on like what you can and cannot use, we don't really have anything that's consolidated to say like this is what's available. So I think that is a great idea. I think that should be part of it. Absolutely. But yeah, I think that, we're not saying that any of these things are going to happen. We're just saying that we would really love to be able to kind of consolidate the due diligence and look at what does that look like for the future. So yeah, I think it's a great idea as well.
I guess I haven't changed my opinion since February. I don't support the due diligence. I think our priorities need to be street CIP. We've got a lot of expense there. Sewer expansion, there is money in the fund, doing a rate study, but I have not changed my opinion on a community center. I don't support it or the due diligence.
What would you define a community center? Because I think that that's another thing that I don't know if
I mean, it doesn't matter. You call it a gymnasium, you call it a community center, you're gonna build something for X amount of dollars. Just looking at that financing plan, just for the city hall, we have a lot of expenditures in this city between city hall, street CIP, sewer expansion. Those haven't been fully addressed. That's, in my opinion, our primary responsibilities. it's not time to be looking at whether it's a gym in a community center. Like I say, I haven't changed my opinion.
And as to the cost to operate a facility as such, I'm pretty sure, if memory serves me correctly, that the administrator, that staff had already spent time, I forget what month it was, but it was, I'm pretty sure, in our packet. And the anticipated increase to the taxpayer to provide sufficient revenue to maintain and operate a facility was extremely high. So I think in a nutshell, we understand, at least I feel,
For
what
more
we need
exact
to
figures than that what was
in terms
provided
of the
in that
operational
email.
costs of a facility.
But I've given you four different people in support of the other two options, right? I mean, that's only one, that is one aspect, and quite frankly, that is not the option that I ever supported as far as from a taxpayer perspective. I came into it saying that I didn't feel that, you know, I would want necessarily a community center solely paid for by residents, but I think that we have two other options that would be really good to look into as far as like what cost savings, you know, can we have by partnering. And again, we're talking about due diligence. I was just on the phone today with one of the commissioners for the county, and it was, there's never been harm in due diligence. And there's never been harm done in knowing numbers. And there's never been harm done in looking at partners. So I think that it is critical for, you know, us to know these things. And we don't want to miss opportunities, right? I mean, I think the first two especially, I mean, I know that, you know, Second Sheet of Ice, I'm not really sure when they're going to do that. But if the resort is willing to look at a partnership, I think that we need to see what that looks like. If we have investors willing to buy privately a $4 million building and look at partnering with us, for us, the residents, to utilize those services within the facilities, I think that's something to look at. So I don't think there's any harm that comes to doing due diligence. I guess that for me, it would be so good to just know the numbers so we can say, yes, this isn't going to work. That's not going to work. This partnership doesn't work, and these costs are too high. And then once we know that, then we can move forward and say, that's just not going to be on the docket in the next however many years.
The other thing too is we did just agree to redoing our ordinances, and part of that is our comprehensive plan. Within the comprehensive plan, we do talk many times about the community center. What better time to have staff invest a little bit of time to address that? Because maybe the comp plan says, we looked at the community center, it is no longer part of our comprehensive plan anymore. We looked at it, it's not feasible, pardon me. So it doesn't even make the comprehensive plan, because right now it's referenced a number of times to be part of there. And if we don't address this, I have a feeling it will be in the comprehensive plan again. And if we can just get these figures down, we can say, don't put that in the comp plan. That is no longer a 10-year vision for the Breezy Point, because now we've looked at those hard cost numbers. Now, if David stands behind what he had presented and says, I feel very confident 100% that those are the numbers, then just repost those, and that's what the due diligence is. But I still want to know, can a city, and this goes back to even the brush pile, can the city purchase a piece of property, maintain, manage, and meet, because again, we can't meet, at a property outside of the city of Breezy Point? I just want to know that answer. And without doing this, we won't know that answer.
I think we already know the answer to that. We
Think,
can't meet outside the city of Breezy Point.
100%.
Okay, so why is that a question?
I know we cannot meet. I'm asking, can the city invest even into a property? Because if there are people who are encouraging us to invest into a property outside the city, we could use, if we knew the statute and we can say, sorry, state statute says we cannot invest, it's a done deal and we can finally walk away and be done with this building.
Or lease.
Or
right?
whatever it is.
Or whatever,
Can we
whatever
invest
it is,
into outside?
yeah. We don't know.
I don't know. I know we cannot meet. That's a guarantee. We cannot meet at said facility. I have a feeling it would probably be no, but I'm just asking, can we direct staff to ask the question?
Yeah, and I think too, I want to go back to your comment, is there's been multiple people online, and we've gone back to this online thing, People are already saying, oh, how does Pequot feel about annexing? Well, when did we ever discuss annexing? I mean, I've also seen on there, especially from the meeting earlier this year, people showed up mad because they thought I was trying to buy a 57,000 square foot building. I mean, some of these things, for the reasons of not supporting it, have not necessarily been because of having all the facts. That's why having all the facts is so critical. And by doing the due diligence, we have all the facts. When we have all the facts, we can make good decisions. And I think that really is going to help us and give us the ability to say, yes, this is a good decision. It's not a good decision. We can't do it. So I really just want to give residents that kind of peace of mind, whether or not these options or potential partnerships are feasible for the future of this city.
Well, if it's not abundantly clear already, I'm with Steve. I'm in no way in favor of it. I think it's a waste of time. We got far bigger priorities and challenges in this community to contend with and to continue to chase a community center. Just because it's been in the comp plan, there's a lot of things in the comp plan. I brought up a month or two ago, things in the comp plan that the council seemingly ignored as not important. So just because we have things in the comp plan doesn't mean that, it should or needs to become a reality, or that we should really even be spending any time at all on it. And I really question the number of residents, the taxpayers in this city, that would, at the end of the day, support a community center. Talk about a survey that was done, nothing statistically significant or valid about that survey at all, and yet we continue to hear about that. Oh, X number of residents. There's such support for this community center. I don't believe it.
I mean, as part of that due diligence, though, we could ask that another survey be done. So, I mean, a lot of talk is going back to this survey, which there was more than just the survey. There were a lot of other events, too, where people came in person and said, I want a community center. But if the question is about, does the community support it, then certainly we could put together a survey that would meet your expectations if you would so weigh in. And
it's not meeting my
the community could weigh in on
expectations.
that then as part of due diligence.
It's being stewards and fiscally responsible with taxpayer money.
Well, you could let them voice their
Okay.
opinion, right?
Well, and decide, right? I mean, let's just say through the due diligence, we do understand our numbers, and maybe we're able to find a way to do it at a significantly reduced cost or whatever it looks like. Then we can go back to our residents and say, do you want a community center based on these costs? So it's not just, do you want a community center? It's, do you want one and at these costs? And
That's
that,
the cost instead of a
exactly.
$8 million or something
Exactly.
that's been thrown around, because
Exactly.
we've gone from a pool and a gym to maybe just a gym to maybe just a workout room. I mean, there's so many variations in pricing and operating cost levels that go with that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, too, we've talked about the local sales option tax, right? That's in a moratorium, I can never say that word. We can't do it right now. But that was an option that we could have, essentially, that local sales tax. It'd be paid for the building of it, not the operating cost, but the bulk of the building. What could even we be collecting on a local sales option tax in our area? We have no idea, which then, if that is something we could do, that goes on the ballot. And at that point, we could then potentially say, okay, if we implement this local sales option tax, here's what the operating costs are that we're expecting at that time. It's going to add into the levy. And so if the voters then say no at that point, then we've really got our answer. That's not until a 2026 or 8 election.
Right.
But motion has to start somewhere to define if something's going to happen or not. And right now, we've had people that want it, don't want it, and to be able to answer some of these questions with firm statements from our staff would just ease people away. I, for one, when Mr. Chansky put in the numbers of what it would cost, I was not for it. But if we have investors that could potentially buy the building, I still don't think that we can operate it. I just want to know that answer.
Agreed.
So I think what I'm hearing at this point is staff will put together a work plan, a proposed work plan based off what's been discussed tonight. We'll bring that to the July 1 meeting, and then you can formally take action on whether or not you would like staff to execute that work plan.
Could I ask if the rest of the council would be willing to separate the whole investigation of the surrounding communities of what amenities are available to residents at a paid price? Where the local gym is, so we could broadcast that on our
Yeah, I'd like
website
to have
for
that.
at least newcomers?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it as long as it's separated and standalone.
Because I kind of want to build that into this, but I have a feeling there's going to be some major discussions. I'd rather see that as a separate action item, Mr. Chansky, if that can be. Because I do think that was a great idea that we could put that on our website to broadcast to people where those amenities could be found.
I agree.
Okay. Okay, I think we have direction on that. So that brings us to through our 4 topics. I think if there's anything else from the council on any of these that you want to add or ask questions of before we call it an evening. Okay, well then it's 8:01. Thanks for your 2 hours of conversation, and we'll commence as we've discussed. Thank you very much.